Hi, I'm Lisa Benson, and I'm a professor of engineering and science education at Clemson University and the editor of the Journal of Engineering Education. Before I begin, I would like to read you an important statement acknowledging the history of the land where I currently live and work. It was written by a group of faculty here at Clemson who are working to connect Clemson students with Clemson history, what they are calling indigenizing Clemson. We would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that Clemson University occupies the traditional and ancestral land of the Cherokee people. Clemson's main campus is built on land seized through U.S. military and diplomatic incursions, culminating in the Treaty of DeWitt's Corner in 1777. This is also land on which people enslaved by the Pickens, Clemson, and Calhoun families lived and worked, and that was transformed into the campus of Clemson University through convict labor. We make this acknowledgement to remember the histories of violence that anticipate our gathering here, to recognize Indigenous claims to life and land, and to recenter those claims as we commit to better ways of caring for each other and this land. Thank you for listening to that acknowledgement. Well, to be honest, while I was incredibly honored by the invitation to give this distinguished lecture by the Education and Research Methods Division of ASEE, the idea of doing this kind of freaked me out. I wasn't convinced they had the right person for the job. But I gave it some thought, and I realized that I do have a bird's eye view of engineering education as a journal editor, looking at who we are, what we talk about, who's doing the talking, and what opportunities there are for us to go beyond publishing our work and really taking action to affect change in engineering education. So here I am. I think what was throwing me off is the name, Distinguished Lecture. I'm far from distinguished, I'm pretty ordinary, and I rarely lecture anymore. We all know that active learning is the way to go. So I thought at the time, well, fine, I'll accept this invitation and we'll just turn this on its head. And we'll think of this not so much as a distinguished lecture, but as ordinary action. I came up with the title, Talk the Talk, Walk the Walk, what our publications say about us as a community of scholars. I had no idea at the time, this is back in the fall of 2019, I had no idea that that title or the idea of walking the walk would be so pressing 6 months later. My idea leading up to that title was to present information about important current topics in engineering education and to explore how we can go beyond just talking about them to putting our ideas to work in our own professional community. I had no idea that the movement Black Lives Matter and systemic racism would be the issues at the forefront at this moment in time. These have been with us for ages as a nation and a world, but here they are, laid bare by the events caught on video cameras, violent events that peeled back the veneer that we carefully place over the racial divides in our world. Months ago, as I was preparing for this talk, I was developing some cute ideas about activities, ordinary actions, that I could do with the couple of dozen people that were going to show up on a random Tuesday in my session in June at the ASEE conference. I had no idea that I could potentially reach much farther than that room full of people in Montreal, and that the ordinary action I'd be prompting people to do would go beyond a thought experiment. But here we are in this virtual space, and we desperately need to take action. For this talk, I was planning on building on that idea of ordinary action and identifying ways to stop just talking the talk and start walking the walk. And I had in mind talking about the mentored reviewer program that I started at JEE. Our program partners experienced reviewers with less experienced reviewers to write constructive, timely reviews of multiple articles, and we structured it to provide scaffolded support that fades with each subsequent article in a way that mentors and mentees can both learn from each other. It's a neat little program, one that I'm proud of, and I hope is widely adopted. All signs indicate that our community is embracing the JEE Mentored Reviewer Program. I like to think that it shows the world that the engineering education research community is different from the many home disciplines that we hail from. We're engineers, scientists, mathematicians who grew up someplace else and moved here. We found our way here into engineering education because we know there is a way to provide excellent educational experiences for all students, and we can be a different kind of scholar here than we are in our home disciplines. While some other disciplines can be gladiatorial and maybe reticent to share ideas freely, we don't need to bring that along with us. We don't need to cut each other down to get ahead. We can collectively, collaboratively set the world on fire. That was my plan for setting up my talk, and I wanted to develop this into two themes. First is building a community that models the way we want the world to be, and the second is bringing the margins into the center. And I was going to develop those two themes by using an example, and this is the example I was going to use, Sesame Street. Bear with me. Characters on Sesame Street interact in ways that model how they want the world to be. They don't shy away from conflict, they grapple with issues honestly, and they resolve their differences in constructive ways. Topics are taken straight from the real world, head on. Racism, sexism, ableism, poverty, homelessness, plagiarism. The characters and the situations they're in represent very diverse types of people and contexts, and they work hard to bring those on the margins of our society in to play central roles in their community. What was I thinking? It seems so childish and naive now. That was so January, and now it's June. For sure, the example was childish, but I think in the end, it's one childish thing that we should not put away. Developing our community in a way that reflects what we want the world to be, including and supporting those on the margins and hearing their voices. Maybe I shouldn't be talking about it in terms of Sesame Street, but instead about how we can make it happen on College Avenue and University Boulevard. In my plan for this talk, I was going to weave in one final thread to tie it all together. A driver instructor once told me when he was teaching me what to focus on while driving, keep your eyes on where you want to go and not on the obstacles in your way, because wherever your eyes are pointed, your wheels will follow. It worked. I learned how to drive, but I've often thought about that advice as a sort of metaphor. What do I focus my mind's eye on? Because that is where my energy will follow. So, following that metaphor, I'd ask, what are we as a community focused on right now? So, I examined keywords in the top cited and accessed articles in JEE, and there were about 25 articles total, with about 150 keywords among them. And this is now where my talk will pivot from what I had planned for today to today. I looked at those keywords specifically for issues related to race. Out of those 150 keywords, diversity appeared once, equity appeared once, gender appeared 3 times, but race and ethnicity did not appear at all, nor did bias, discrimination, sexual orientation, social justice, or underrepresentation. Not once. Now, all those terms that I just mentioned are part of the Engineering Education Research Taxonomy. This is a list developed by a team of our colleagues, and it's a source for keywords for engineering education research articles for JEE and other publications. It's updated periodically based on demand. So you'd think that if our community is talking about certain topics, those keywords would show up in the taxonomy. But here are a few important terms that are not in the engineering education research taxonomy. Racism, sexism, ableism, stereotype threat, implicit bias, microaggression, minoritized populations, indigenous populations, human rights, belongingness, culture, ecosystem, critical theory, critical race theory, queer theory, crypt theory, meritocracy, systemic racism, emotion, hidden curriculum, systems of oppression. You get the idea. Researchers can still use these keywords in their articles, but if our taxonomy is updated on demand, and these terms are not in our taxonomy, then we're not demanding them. Our collective inner gaze is focused elsewhere. I want to acknowledge my colleagues who are currently working hard in these areas, particularly people of color in our community. But it's important to recognize and acknowledge that we are not citing or accessing their work very much. It's also important to look at who's doing the talking as well as what we're talking about. I did a quick review of JEE papers that discuss race, and it revealed that only a fraction, less than a quarter, of the authors are people of color. What is going on? I'm guessing, without the benefit of being able to see you all as an audience, that people of color out there are nodding their heads, saying, yes, 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 we have known this all along. We are on the margins of our community. Based on at least publication indicators, our Black lives do not, in fact, matter in engineering education research. And it shouldn't take a video for this to be a priority in our community. We have to do better, and we can't just talk about doing better. It can't be abstract. We have to take action, and it has to be specific and intentional. JEE and other journals in our community, like the Journal of Women and Minorities in Science and Engineering, are already taking steps in terms of our publication policies and practices. JEE instituted a practice at the prompting of Alice Pauly's 2017 guest editorial, Shifting the Default, the case for making diversity the expected condition for engineering education and making whiteness and maleness visible. We now require authors to report study participants' gender, race, ethnicity, among other demographic indicators, and describe the extent to which their study populations are representative of the entire population. The study population is not representative. For example, if it is primarily white and male, this has to be discussed as a limitation of the study. Julie Martin, the editor of the Journal of Women and Minorities in Science and Engineering, is implementing a policy requiring papers to include a statement of how researchers protected vulnerable populations as part of their work. Julie and I and other journal editors readily admit these are first steps. Could we as a community take further steps? For example, not just treating a lack of diversity or attention to vulnerable populations as limitations, but as barriers to publication. What if we did not publish any work that, if it includes a study of humans, does not include a diverse representative study population, or that fails to acknowledge the voices of vulnerable populations? What if we rethink our own taxonomy that we use to describe and tag our work to include theories, methods, contexts, and outcomes that explicitly focus on inclusivity, race, bias, minoritized populations, or critical theory, to name a few? What if we intentionally educate ourselves about diversity, equity, and inclusivity, and find ways to focus on it in our own research in collaboration with people of color? I think these are tangible goals that we as a community could work towards, because our community should be a reflection of the way we want the world to be, and because we are dedicated to bringing those at the margins in to play central roles in our community. If we are talking the talk about how Black lives matter, we need to walk the walk and address it in our own work. We can implement practices that could be models for other disciplines and communities. We can engage all members of our community, explicitly welcoming those at the margins in respectful discourse about our scholarship. We can collaborate with people of color on work that focuses explicitly on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusivity in our classrooms, our programs, our own research groups, and of course, in our publications. Our publications speak volumes about us as a community of scholars. Our publications are a product of our culture, our actions, our advocacy on behalf of our Black colleagues. It's time to step it up and walk the walk. Thank you.